Hello, my name is Tyler Bowen, and today I'm going to take you through my guide to success in sales through a couple of interviews I conducted with former mentors, coworkers, and managers of mine. So the first person I interviewed was a man named Doug Hagedon. Doug is a car salesman at LaFontaine Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram of Fenton, Michigan. He's been a car salesman for 6 years now. Started out as a porter and then decided he wanted to get into sales. And this ended up being a great decision for him because he is now the 75th best Chrysler salesman in all of America. So I met Doug when I was working at LaFontaine this summer as a part of an internship, and he was my mentor when I was in sales. So it was a great experience working with Doug. So in my interview with Doug, the first thing I asked him was about building trust. And I specifically asked him, tell me how important it is to build trust in a sales relationship. He said it is very important because you need to build rapport. And when you build rapport, you create an honest and real relationship with the customer that keeps them coming back and creates long-term business for yourself, which is a good thing. And he said you can build rapport by being honest with them and actually caring about them, not just faking being caring about them, but actually doing it. Because when you do this, it makes the customer feel like they're not just a number and that they actually matter, and that's how real relationships are created. The other thing he said he would do in order to build trust is to display your intentions out front with the customer. Because when people walk into a dealership, they tend to think car salesmen are really sleazy and try to screw you over, but he tries to throw that stereotype out the window as quick as possible by explaining to them that he is their guide, not just a salesperson who's trying to sell them something, but he is supposed to guide them to their need, and then they make that purchase decision. So the second question I asked him was how he built his customer network. I said, since you are the 75th ranked Chrysler salesman in America, what are some of the things you did to build your clientele base? And he basically said that the key is relationships lead to more relationships. And what he meant by that is creating one relationship with someone and making a positive impact on them leads them to go and to tell their friends about their positive experience, and they tell their friends, and so on and so forth, until you end up creating a positive reputation for yourself. That was one thing he did to help build his clientele base. Another thing he said he would do was anytime he went to a restaurant or anywhere he went out to eat, he would leave his business card just on the table. Just get his name out there. He'd go door to door, knocking on businesses, asking if anyone needed a car. And while this was basically cold calling, we all know that's not the greatest method for selling, he was trying to get his name out there, and with the one or two people who do end up calling back, then he makes a positive relationship with them, and then they tell their friends, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, your base is built up. Final thing he said he did to create a clientele base was his relationship with a different salesman named Sammy. Sammy sells over 50 cars a month, which is very impressive because the average is about 12. And by showing Sammy what a good salesperson he was, he convinced Sammy to give Doug some of his clientele base, and they ended up working together so that they could sell more cars. And in doing this, Doug created a lot more relationships, and that is how he ended up being so successful. So, third question I asked him was about understanding the personality of your customer. I asked him, the car business is a people business. And since it's a people business, you got to deal with all different types of personalities. How important is it to understand those different types of personalities? And he said, it's very important to understand who you're talking to because that determines what price to sell the car at, basically. He said he would start out every customer at the MSRP price, but if something tipped him off, like he knew that they absolutely loved the car and they would pay anything to get it, well, then he'd raise the price a little bit. If he had a customer who was able to pay more but they weren't really sure about it, he would pull one of his selling tricks and oversell and then bring it down to a reasonable price. What I mean by that is he would set the price at, say, $400 a month. And obviously that doesn't sound very good, so then he would bring it down to about $379, which is really what the price was the whole time. So it makes $379 sound a lot better because it came down from $400, and that's how he would convince people who were a little bit unsure. And then the other thing he said is he never negotiates. Whatever he decided to set the price at, that's what he was staying at. He doesn't come down, no negotiating. And the reason he does that is because, one, when he downsells, that's money out of his pocket because he's paid commission. And then that puts a lot more pressure on the customer because then they got to go to another dealership or restart the whole process over, and it just gives him all the leverage. So the final question I asked him was about earning a commitment. And the way he earned a commitment from people when they walk into a dealership was by first earning their trust, which we talked about. Second, he would build a value into the car, which is when you're dealing with this much money, you have to show them why this car will supply their needs, and that's what building value does. And then he would attempt to close the sale. He would close the sale by, say, for instance, he was on a test drive with a customer. He would tell them when they got back to the dealership, you want to go park that over there in sold row. And hopefully that would get a yes out of them because you're putting that little thought in their head that this car is sold to me, and it's just a little mind game he would use to help close the deal, which I thought was pretty interesting. So with that being said, I have a little bit of a video to display that process of taking a customer who is a little unsure of themselves and changing their mind so that they can make a sale. And this quote is from the movie The Goods. Live hard, sell hard.
Sir, there's no smoking on airplanes.
I know. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Don't worry about it. I'll be quick.
Sir, if you like that, I'll have to report you to the FAA.
Stacy, do you know when the first commercial flight went smokeless?
No.
1973. And did you know that in 1969, when smoking was allowed on all flights, we put a man on the moon?
I had no idea.
Look. You know what that is? That's a remnant of a better time. But they welded it shut. And it starts with ashtrays, and it ends with all of our precious freedoms being stripped away. I remember back in the day when you got on a plane, and you knew you were for a good time. A little smoking, a little drinking, and the stewardesses, Stacy, you come from a proud tradition of blazing hot stewardesses. And now you can't do one damn thing without someone reporting you to the Department of Homeland Security. Am I right?
Yes, now.
I had to take my pants off and nibble my Old Spice down to 3 ounces just to get on the plane, Stacy.
They made me throw out my mouthwash.
I had to give up my bath jellies.
They made me breastfeed some old man.
That's what I'm talking about. But we don't have to take it, Stacy. Like Henry David Thoreau and Rosa Parks and David Lee Roth when he left Van Halen, we can say enough. Enough injustice. And when you and I are old and gray, we can look back on this and remember when we were 30,000 feet above God's green earth and we smoked one. We smoked one for America!
You motherfucker. Who are you?
I'm John Reddy, and I got the goods.
Miller Kush.
None pops their head.
So apologies for the swear word, but basically what this video shows is a great salesperson taking a customer who had no interest in letting him smoke and building a relationship with her by talking about how good of a stewardess she was and how she deserves more rights than that, and building that rapport with her to be able to convince him that he can do something totally illegal and smoke on a flight. So I just thought that was funny and fit well with this part of my presentation. So moving on, the next person I interviewed was a man named Josh Harris. Josh is a State Farm agent from Midland, Michigan, works right off Eastman. He owns his own agency. He has been in the business for 10 years, and I met him when I was in an insurance class my sophomore year. Dr. Webb brought him in as a speaker, and I figured he would be the perfect candidate to do a selling presentation because he sells insurance every day. So in my interview with Josh, I talked to him about the importance of self-leadership and why it's especially important in the insurance industry as opposed to other industries. And he basically said that, yeah, it's very important to have self-leadership in his business because you're in charge of yourself. And no one's going to put food on your table at the end of every month. And so it's your job to make sure that you do sell enough insurance so that you're able to provide for yourself, because no one's going to hold your hand. It basically requires you to push all the chips in on yourself and bet on yourself that you can be successful. And that takes a lot of guts and self-discipline and promise that you're going to work hard, because if you don't work hard, then that's going to hurt your bottom line at the end of every month. So he was very keen on the importance of self-leadership. Second question I asked him about was about the importance of customer relationships. And I asked him, why are customer relationships such a vital factor in your success? And he basically said that when you form connections, it leads to repeat business. Because like we said earlier, when you form connections, it creates a long-term personal relationship, and a lot of Josh's clients know him as their insurance guy. So whenever they have a need, they keep coming back to him, and that's what keeps his business going, is that repeat business and long-term relationships. And also he talked about how fun it is, honestly. Being an insurance agent, that's another people business, and if you don't like people, you're not going to survive in this business. So you have to like dealing with people, and he finds the socialization and just talking to people and getting to know them to be very fun, and that's part of the reason he's successful, because he likes his clients and they like him. So the third question I asked him was about how he addresses concerns and why that's important, and he said the addressing concerns, the key to it is listening. And everyone can talk, but very few can genuinely listen. Everyone loves to talk about themselves, but when people walk into his agency, you have to be able to listen so you can find out what they really need. If they're looking for life insurance, but they have no dependents, then maybe he should explain to them that they don't need to take out $500,000 because no one's really dependent on him if he does pass away. And if he does good for his clients, then that's going to build up, again, a long-term relationship with them, and it'll benefit his business in the long run. The other thing he said was when there's a separate part of dealing with concerns in his business, because it's not just the sale. He has to deal with claims as well. After the sale, when people get in a car accident and have to file a claim, that's even more important to deal with. You have to be able to listen, because in that time they're in a very delicate state where you have to listen to what happened, be empathetic, and help them out in their time of need, because they're desperate, and if you can't listen to them, it's going to make or break your relationship with them. So finally, the last question I asked him was about the importance of teamwork. Basically he said teamwork is especially important in his business because when a customer buys insurance, they go through every section of the agency. First, when they call in, they have to deal with the receptionist. Then they transfer them to a CSR. And then from there, they may or may not have to go to underwriting. And there's only 12 people who work in his agency, but they have to go through all of them every time they buy something. And then again, if they have to file a claim. So it's very important that they are a well-oiled machine and that they're all passing the customer on to another great experience and can go through the entire agency and have an overall positive experience. And the final person I interviewed was a man named Mark Thompson. Mark currently lives in Alaska. He was my manager when I worked at CVS Health 2 years ago, and he was only at CVS for 1 year. So when I called him to ask about his experience at CVS, he didn't have a ton of information, but he talked about a time when he used to be a manager at an AT&T store in New Hudson, and he was there for 5 years. So my first question to Mark was about ethics in sales and what his thoughts were on it. And he said that good ethics equals repeat business. Bad ethics equals won the battle, lost the war. And what that basically means is when you have good ethics with the customer and give them a good deal, again, that keeps them coming back and you form a positive relationship with them and they have an overall positive experience and your long-term business succeeds. And as for bad business, he described that as winning the battle but losing the war. What that means is when you could screw a customer over one time because cell phones are extremely complicated devices and you could take advantage of, say, an old person who's not very good with technology and charge them a ton of money. And while they may pay it that one time, you can guarantee they're never coming back because they're going to realize they got screwed over eventually and that other people have better prices. So you win the one time, but in the long term, they're never coming back. So it's not good overall. Second thing I asked him about was how he builds value into a product and how it benefits him. And same thing that Doug was telling me, building value can help convince them. It can, when you're paying a substantial amount of money for a cell phone, you have to be able to show them the value in that and not just give them the lowest price. When you build value, it shows them that what they're spending their money on is worth it. And people tend to buy value, not just the lowest price. So the final question I asked Mark was about the importance of communication and why that is important in his business. And he said that communication is especially important with cell phones because, again, they're very complex devices, and he has to be able to explain features, and if he can't explain features and why it's worth it, the customer doesn't see any value, and then he's not going to have any sales. So I thought it was interesting that, especially in his business, communication is important because not many people are extremely cell phone tacky. So he has to be able to explain that like it's the back of his hand. So to recap, through my 3 interviews, we noticed that all 3 of them have some very certain consistencies. All of them like to build value, all of them like to form relationships, and all of them like to have strong communication. Doug was very keen on negotiating skills. Josh was especially keen on relationships because that's how he gets his business. It's a people business, and that's what he depends on. And Mark is dependent on being able to communicate his cell phone features to customers and explain them so that they can have a good understanding of what they are buying and be able to have more sales in the long run. So thank you for watching, and God bless.